This is also really relevant. Go ahead and put this next piece up on the screen. So we reported that, China has been making some overtures. Obviously, they've been talking to Putin basically the whole time. And in fact, Xi is in Moscow to meet for 3 days with, Putin and with other Russian leaders. So incredibly significant moment. But they've been making overtures not just to Putin, but also to Zelensky. And Zelensky has been sort of open to that.
He says he'll call him.
Yeah,
he says he'll talk to him.
They're supposed to talk potentially next week. China also put out a kind of rough outline of what they thought a peace deal might look like, which Zelensky was also kind of open to. Well, now we have this report from the Wall Street Journal that the U.S. is trying to head off any potential proposals from Beijing for a ceasefire in Ukraine ahead of this Russia-China summit. They say suspending fighting now would help solidify Russia's hold on Ukrainian territory. John Kirby said a ceasefire now is, again, effectively the ratification of Russian conquest. He said it would recognize Russia's territorial gains and occupation of Ukrainian territory while giving Moscow a chance to entrench its positions and refresh its troops as Ukraine prepares for an anticipated spring offensive. Let me give you a little bit more of the details from this piece, and then we can react, and I have a lot to say about this. As Russia and China lay out the agenda for the Putin-Xi meeting, Mr. Kirby said the U.S. wants to draw attention to any Chinese proposal for a ceasefire that would be one-sided and reflect only the Russian perspective. He said he couldn't speak for Zelensky and whether he would accept that Chinese-backed proposal, but, quote, we certainly don't support calls for a ceasefire that would be called for by the PRC in a meeting in Moscow. They go on to say, Mr. Zelensky has taken a different approach with Beijing so far, commending the 12-point Chinese position paper on Ukraine. Mr. Zelensky, however, stressed the Chinese paper's emphasis on territorial integrity, and his foreign minister said he also discussed the significance of the principle of territorial integrity in a phone call. So let me break this down for you. Ukraine, at least publicly, has been sort of open to these overtures. And remember how the U.S., Biden's line is always nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Except when it comes to China actually trying to do something useful here and potentially broker a ceasefire. Oh, no, we can't have that. Suddenly, the U.S. feels emboldened to assert their opinion that they want hostilities to continue, lest we be embarrassed by the Chinese playing a significant role here as potential peacemakers.
If the Chinese do, we should be embarrassed. That's why the framing of our entire segment, the last time we talked about this, it is a humiliation. It's an international humiliation. It also is the worst nightmare of the Nixonian strategy and the Kissingerian strategy of the 1970s, where we recognized, and look, the opening of China was a disaster for many reasons in the way that it was executed, but strategically it was a very smart idea. The idea was China is a behemoth, it will grow, inevitably it will become one of the largest powers in East Asia. A linking up between our adversary at the time, the Soviet Union, and China would be a geopolitical disaster for the United States. We should do everything in our power to exploit the rift between Moscow and to Beijing, to draw relations between those two, and to deny this power apparatus. That was the Kissingerian and Nixonian strategy. And it was fundamentally correct. Now, again, we executed it in a very wrong way in terms of total neoliberalization, in terms of trade, etc. There was a way, absolutely, I think, to go back in time and to do it differently. Now, we have actually forced the two powers together, where they are now on the part where defining territorial integrity through invasion is a benefit to both of them. China's case in its want to take over Taiwan, Putin's case in order to rescue former territory that was from the Soviet Union. And with these two powers, by driving them together, they are more powerful today, individually and then together, than almost in the times of the Soviet Union. And with China, together, I mean, just because of the sheer amount of China's size. So then when we look at this, and to be humiliated on the international stage, and furthermore, to look at this and take a maximalist position on the peace deal, it's a big mistake. Following in the footsteps, or following and supporting the Ukrainians in this endeavor is the way that we should be. Really, if it was a nothing without Ukraine, nothing for Ukraine without Ukraine strategy, we'd be like, look, if Mr. Zelensky wants to entertain that opportunity, we are happy to back him up at the negotiating table. That's it. Just say that. He is the chief of Ukraine. And also, by the way, because Zelensky, remember this, anytime anyone in the West says something like this, like Elon, he attacks them as Putin's pawns and all this, you know why he's not saying that about China? Because he knows China is on the precipice of giving Russia lethal and heavy weapons. And if he were to just reject it outright, Beijing could say, we tried, but Zelensky says he's not interested. Putin, here's all the weapons that you could ever want or ever need and use in the Ukraine conflict. That is why he can see the grand picture for his own country. He needs to shore up support in the West for as much as humanly possible. And by the way he's prosecuting the war right now is ridiculous. If there were any actual military strategists who weren't wholly co-opted by Ukraine, they would look at his expenditure of ammunition in places like Bakhmut and say, you're an idiot. What are you doing? You have no industrial base. You're running out of ammo. You got 6-month runway, and America's probably not going to give you any more. What are you actually going about? If you look at it almost like a balance sheet in the way that he is prosecuting the war, and then what the potential insertion of Chinese weapons would do to the Russian military cause, it would be a full-fledged disaster. And maybe he can see that. Because if I can see it sitting here, he has access to the real information.
He probably just assumes that we will keep giving him everything he wants, since that's been the tradition since the war.
Well, through Congress,
since the war started.
At least from the 100 bill. Yeah, I mean, and that's another part that drives me nuts. Maybe this is something we could talk about as well tomorrow. But, you know, his ammunition stock, he's acting like one of the great powers in the middle of World War I. The difference is those great powers were actual great powers and had an industrial base to make more shells. He can do nothing.
Not only had an existing industrial base, but actually, you know, spun up massive additional capacity.
Population,
which,
base.
you know, since we're their primary backer, like, we're not spinning up additional capacity. So even our capacity is limited in terms of what we even could send them. So, but to go back to this report about China, I mean, there are a few things here, and I was talking to our friend Bronco about some of this and some of the lessons to take away from it. I mean, number one, the attitude towards the Chinese overtures here from the U.S. government and their aligned media has been very dismissive. Like, this isn't serious. It's not going to happen. Well, if it's not serious and it's not going to happen, why do you feel the need to come in over the top and say, absolutely no ceasefire, we're opposed to it? That's number one. Number two, it really exposes, and to me this is the key point, how much of a lie this idea of, like, oh, we're just backing Ukraine and doing what they want. We are so involved. We are proxy combatants. And so it has always been the case. It's just they're actually showing it now when Zelensky has shown some public signs of wanting to actually entertain these overtures. And we are very much opposed to it because we basically don't want to be humiliated and may think that we have something to gain from this war indefinitely continuing at great expense to Ukrainian civilians and the Ukrainian economy and the world economy as well. So those pieces, I think, are really clear here. It's just like this whole farce of, oh, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine has always been a lie. And then the other piece, zooming out from this particular conflict, China obviously just played deal maker in the Middle East as well. Trita Parsi has been warning about, since we get ourselves embroiled as combatants, co-combatants effectively in these various conflicts in the Middle East, of course he's referring to Yemen, it makes it so, of course, no one is going to listen to us as a peacemaker and a deal maker. Now, China has sort of like tacitly backed her, but they haven't shipped those heavy weapons yet. You know, they've talked about the limitless relationship, but they haven't gone all in. And they've said some things that have been critical of Russia as well. So they've maintained more credibility on the international stage in this conflict as a potential deal maker, which I think is also why the U.S. finds themselves in a really bad position here.
Yeah, no, all of that, well said. It's one of those where is this even a word? Geostrategically, probably not. That's like a Bushism. But let's zoom out. I think it would be a disaster for American power and for American hegemony for something like this to happen. The Iraq-Saudi thing or Iran-Saudi thing, that's one thing. That's, you know, this is the most important thing going on in the globe. And if it were to come to a close with the U.S. not literally at the center of the brokering process, that basically returns us to full-blown multipolarity, which is a very unstable system. It would be, ironically, we're thinking of the Russia conflict in Ukraine through a U.S. hegemony lens. This is all just Euro supremacy, by disregarding the relations with the global South, with India and with China, with Japan and South Korea, all of whom see the conflict very differently than the way that we do. So it's an ideological blind spot, which would be a huge blow, I think, to American power. And it would be an absolute humiliation of Joe Biden if something like this.
I mean, I don't really care about American power. I just want the war to end because it's been devastating for them and it's been pretty devastating for the world as well.
I care about the American way of life, Krystal, all of which is backed up by American power.
I mean, we would be fine in multipolar world. I think there's a lot of alarmism.
If everyone wants to pay $15 a gallon for gas and to never buy anything ever again for a cheap way, which is literally, look, I'm not saying
oil and gas. Biden's just greenlit the Willow Project. Don't worry, we're going to be fine.
That ain't going to make up any the loss of international control of the seas. Different debate for another day.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.